Welcome to the third episode of the Walking Home podcast. Today I'm joined by my friend Aildrene. How would you describe yourself in its most prideful form?
I describe myself as someone who collects, writes, and shares stories for a living. So I've been doing that for more than a decade now. I've been in the international development sector, so that means NGOs, recently with the UN, and before that, organizations dealing with many sorts of issues, poverty, health, education. And now I'm taking a career break, and so I'm looking to myself as someone who's a full-time creative now that I have all the time in the world to pursue my creative passions.
You had a very unique job. You've had very unique jobs working with NGOs, and your most recent job was working with the UN. So I'm kind of curious about what that involved.
With the UN, it's a project called Giga. I was leading the comms team, and then eventually I became content manager. And the problem we're trying to solve is the digital divide. Many people don't know this, but billions of people still don't have access to the internet. It's like one third of humanity, and that includes millions of children. So our focus is connecting schools to the internet because we believe that connecting schools to the internet like sparks the connection for the whole community. And it's a more sustainable way of doing it rather than, connecting individual families as well.
I think most people, when they hear the UN, they're like, is that helpful? Is that not helpful? Is that good use of resources? Going through that experience of being with the UN, what's your overall thought about the UN as an organization?
Well, the UN was set up with good intentions. Like it was set up after the Second World War. It was set up so that countries begin to cooperate with each other so humanity can, prevent another big world war from happening. I think the disconnect is that many people don't really know what it does. The concern I have right now is that with the changing world order, you see it how the most powerful country in the world is now questioning the legitimacy of these international organizations. The UN will definitely be put into a test. We'll see how it will evolve. As I've mentioned, it was created after the World War, so definitely it will see some evolution as well.
I imagine there are challenges, but you've seen the real impact of the work of the UN in changing the lives of those who are lacking resources. And
Yes. And maybe one thing to point out is that, especially in the internet age right now, people are impatient. So you always want to see results. It's not how development works. In order to, you know, get into the final intervention, like maybe provide surgeries for the people who need them, you need to build hospitals first. You need to train the doctors first. And if you're starting with a community from scratch, then you're going to wait years and decades to build those kinds of things. If you're working in a country where there's conflict, then you have additional layers of things that you need to solve first before getting into that final end result that your organization is aiming for. And so sometimes it's a bit difficult to tell that story as well, and that also put things into scrutiny, like why are you doing this? It doesn't, you know help people in need at this moment, but if you look at it as an investment for the decades to come, then it changes the whole story.
yeah, yeah, that's important to point out. Yeah, I think when it comes to these things, people have a high level of skepticism, and I mean, certainly there's examples of NGOs, organizations mismanaging funds, and there's bureaucracy, and there's all this kind of stuff. But like you said, it's not good or bad. There's different kind of situations, and maybe a lot of time that scrutiny and skepticism is misdirected.
Yeah, I agree, scrutiny is necessary, totally necessary, but like you said, like if it's misinformed, then it's a different story as well.
And oh boy, are we living in the age of misinformation? It's just wild times, wild times. So you quit the UN job. You quit it because you hate the UN, correct?
Let me just give a small context. So in the UN, most of the employees, I think, at least in our team, for example, you can say 90% of our 80-person team, all of us are in contractual jobs. That's just how the UN works because it's so expensive to get them as full-time staff with all the benefits. And so people are renewed every 6 months, every year or 2 years. My contract was ending, but I chose not to renew. And so what people usually label it as like a career break or a contract break.
That's a common thing in the UN space.
Yes, yes, very common, especially when people consider still going back, instead of saying that they quit, like they're just taking a contract break.
What is it that motivated you to take this contract break?
My motivation is really to explore different creative projects. I don't know if you've been aware of the FIRE movement. That's called Financial Independence Retire Early movement, where you kind of save money and then try to retire early. I've had that mindset for many, many years back. When the UN contract ended, I was in the crossroads of like renewing. I like the opportunities that the UN gave me. I can still continue, but I think at that time when the contract has ended, it was also like a nice decision point for me. Like, hey, for the first time in your life, I am at a position to take a break. I can finally afford it for the first time. So I decided, okay, maybe take it this time, because my next time would be, I don't know, when I'm older, maybe 5, 10 years from now, and I don't know my circumstances at that time. So I took the leap of faith. Of course, it had a lot of saving to do in order to get to that point.
Those aren't easy leaps to take. So I'm kind of curious, like, what's the devil on your shoulder? What's the angel on your shoulder? What was fear involved? And what was the passion involved or the excitement involved?
Oh, I love this. I even had many sessions with my therapist, aka ChatGPT, about
Oh
this.
my God.
And so we, we went into a lot of decision trees.
Yeah.
I mean, it's a very, very hard decision, I would say. First, in the Philippines, I'm the firstborn, and in the Philippines, basically, you're expected as children of your parents, you're expected to be the provider of your family. Like basically, you're the retirement of your parents. That's already like expected of Filipino children. That's one thing I couldn't abandon. So in the past, even if I had that desire to take a break, it's just not possible. Of course, you're also looking into like what would happen if you quote unquote abandon a career. Even if it's just a break, it feels like abandoning something. But at the same time, on the other hand, it seems like it's just the right time to do it. Like, I've been working more than 15 years already, haven't had taken a break. In our personal conversations, I've began to go to therapy as well, even medication for burnout, for depression. So I think it's time to get a reset. What comforted me is that it's not a permanent decision, it's just a break. So why am I putting a lot of, expectation into it? Again, as I'm saying, I'm still young. I can go back to the workforce again. But just having this, I don't know, you can say it's an adult gap here. I think it's just essential. And I saw a video of someone saying that downtimes or crashes in your life are essential. It's like your software crashing, because after a crash, then you need to update your software. So if you've never had resets in your life, if you've never had these points, your software will never be upgraded. So yeah, I think it's just time to do that.
You're kind of framing this in like two different ways. Like one of them is kind of an opportunity to pursue creative pursuits. Another is kind of an opportunity to take a break and have space. You also shared kind of like the mental health kind of aspect of it as well. When I was going through my own kind of like mental health experience, a question that really appeared for me was a purpose in life, directing attention towards my purpose. I find that gives me a renewed sense of excitement, joy, direction towards life. Oftentimes, if I'm feeling the opposite, oftentimes is because I've directed attention away from that, or I'm not pursuing that. Do you see parallels in that?
I have a hot take on this, and I totally agree with purpose. I think it's necessary for someone to get meaning from life. At the same time, the usual story is a person quits his or her corporate job because it's soul sucking, it doesn't have any purpose. The company's purpose is just to earn money, and the bottom line is to make as most profits as possible. For me, it's different. In the development sector, the purpose is to spend the most amount of money so that you do the most amount of impact. So that's also a different shift in thinking for me when I entered the sector. And it's very like it's purpose driven. Like every time I go to work, I always use that as inspiration. But what I would say is that even in that field, in purpose driven fields, it's still important to have that sort of balance. It's of course noble to to pour all of your efforts to the betterment of humanity, but you can only pour from your cup if your cup is also full, right? You also need to be aware of how you're filling your cup. Otherwise, you'll just also be an empty soul, like giving giving crumbs for the communities that you serve. So I would say that yeah, purpose is important, but at the same time, you also need to be aware of how you're trying to achieve that purpose and is it a sustainable way?
Mm,
On the other end of the spectrum, I also am a fan of absurdity. So I love absurd movies, absurd stories, and I think it might be the antithesis of purpose, where like if you have absurdity, then things don't have to have a purpose. And I think that's beautiful because sometimes we assign a lot of meaning. Everything has to have a purpose. Everything has to have meaning. But sometimes, like many times, life is just crazy. And if you just accept that absurdity, like it makes life richer and it makes the meaningful parts of life more meaningful. So I've learned to accept that fact that things are gonna be as absurd as they could get. Chaos, chaos is gonna be part of the formula as always. So yeah, just embracing that.
interesting, interesting. Okay. On the topic of purpose, and I resonate with that a little bit coming from education, because like part of what attracted me as being an educator was also kind of like wanting a sense of purpose in my work, not solely working for a profit driven organization, although I was working for private schools and they are arguably quite profit driven. But there was a sense of fulfillment in being involved in the lives of these students, and at times hopefully inspiring them, supporting them, so on. But there was one time I was having conversation with some students and sharing about kind of like what they want to do in life and so on. And I think one of my students said, "Is this what you wanted to do? You want to be a teacher?" And I was like, and it's something that I enjoy, but uh, you know, there's there's purpose, and then there's also just kind of I don't know if fulfillment is another word, but just kind of like we have our dreams, we have our passions, we have our interests, and one of mine is media and creating purposeful media. I always saw, in my own personal journey, I found media to be incredible. Part of my journey of personal happiness, conscientiousness, growth was media. Whether that would be books or related to spirituality, from like Eckhart Tolle, Power of Now, to like documentaries related to impact on the planet, and my interest in like veganism, and like all these ideas were spurred by different forms of media, and I became really appreciative and grateful for the role of these creators, these authors, in sharing these ideas, and the large scale impact they were able to create through their art. And so for me, it was like that was something within me that felt untapped. So it was purpose, but it wasn't just having a sense of purpose. It was fulfilling those kind of those wishes, those kind of like in the form I wanted. I'm curious if you resonate with that one, and then also the absurdity. I think I don't know if this is exactly what you're talking about, but perhaps it relates. But I've grown an appreciation for play. First, my outlook on art was very much like this needs to have a social message, have an impact, or else it's not art. Like that was like the very kind of like like what's the point of this, and that's expanded over time to have an appreciation for beauty and play and absurdity, and my view on the purpose of life has grown to include the importance of play, the importance of joy, include the importance of seeing the absurdity in which we live. Like recognizing the randomness, the chaos, the fact that we're on this spinning ball in the middle of space, and not to take ourselves so seriously. Curious on your thoughts relating to fulfillment. is this is do you see yourself as kind of entering a new chapter of fulfillment, or was that part of the inspiration to your inspiration now? And also with my comments on the absurdity, is that kind of what connect to resonate with what you were mentioning?
Yeah, I totally resonate with the concept of play, and of course the fulfillment that comes with it. Actually, if you look at it, even if it's play, if it's something without a quote unquote purpose, it can also bring joy and fulfillment. So actually, I would extend that concept a bit to life itself. Like I used to believe that, of course, again, it's noble, and we've been used to the belief that our lives should have purpose and meaning. And I agree with that. Of course, that's nice to spend your life in the most meaningful way possible. But at the same time, I'm also taking it with a grain of salt, and I think we should, because we put so much importance to our existence. And as you've said, we're just a speck, a microscopic thing in this, speck of dust floating in the universe. So that can be, read as a depressing fact, but for me, it's liberating, because, or maybe it's also escapist for a bit, because all these things that we're concerned about, it's just all, all floating in ether.
There's different ways to perceive it, but yeah, I totally agree that it can be a liberating thought. Personally, I find mortality a very liberating thought.
Mortality. I think to the extreme, for example, if you have the extremes of anything, it can be harmful. And so, in terms of purpose and meaning, if you get that into the, like, put that, like, turn up the dials into the extreme, then you get authoritarian leaders, because they're so filled with purpose, and they're so, like, my life has to have meaning. I should leave a legacy. I should, you know, build an empire. But if everyone thinks that way, can you just imagine a world that looks like that? Can you imagine a world filled with Elon Musks? Because, my life is designed, like, I need to, build rocket ships in order for my life to be meaningful. I'm not saying, like, I'm just painting the extreme picture of it.
So focused on this kind of like really significant end that any means are justified.
Exactly, exactly. When in fact you can find purpose and meaning in the smaller things in life, you know, being present with your family, being present in this conversation between the two of us. Who else has the luxury of doing that when they're all, buried in work and don't have time for the smaller things in life? What I'm saying is that we should question everything, including all these grand gestures of, like, missions that we put into our lives.
Yeah, 100%. And actually, right now I'm kind of in this island, Panglao in Bohol, and it's always when I come to places like this that have less infrastructure, many people living at a different level of finance and resources, that it makes me kind of like question drive and ambition and importance. And well, not really question, it's like those things kind of evaporate almost. It's like, it's when you're kind of in this, like, when you're kind of in these, often in kind of the Western world or even like big metropolises, it's everybody's kind of got this like drive, everybody's kind of going towards these missions. And then when you come to somewhere like here, you're like, oh, I don't know if any of that stuff matters.
Correct, correct. I remember. I'll share a couple of stories related to ambition. So in high school, I entered the Philippine Science High School. It is branded as the school for the gifted children, because the exams are just so difficult. You get into a series of, many different exams, screenings. It's a nationwide exam, and only maybe the top 1% get in. And at that time, I never knew about this school. Like, during elementary school, I never knew that that school existed. But then my classmate, like, he was filling out forms, and then he had an extra form, and he just passed a form to me. It was never my dream to be in that school, because I've never heard of it. And the absurdity of that situation is that if I was never given that form, then I would never have gotten into that school. And then when I entered that school, then, and like, I'm so grateful to be part of that institution. I've never imagined that I'd be part of that school, because I never knew about it as well. But when I entered the school, like, you get to meet people, like very smart people, those from the most exclusive schools in the Philippines, and like, wow, many people would have like ambition to achieve that goal, but sometimes it just happens randomly. And so fast forward to college and university, I graduated top of my class, and then my family treated me like, because I graduated with some honors and top of the class. But what we had after graduation is that we went to a KFC, and then they treated me with some rice and chicken. And my brother keeps on teasing me until now that, like, after all the achievements that all the hardships that you go through at university, all you get is a KFC. But that's just a humbling experience, because my parents wouldn't know about like restaurants. We never went to restaurants at that time, and that was the best thing that they knew to celebrate. And like the rest of my batchmates would go to high-end restaurants at that time. But I always reflect on those times, like, if I were in a different context, that achievement would have meant more to, like, in a different family, for example, or in a different community. But for us, it's just that it's a nice achievement. It's a nice Sunday. Let's go out and have some fast food. So the reason I'm sharing this is that I've become irreverent to the notion of achievement, of being a top person, of a top achiever. It's always been humbling for me that these are just proxies that society assigned to specific people, but at the end of the day, they don't matter so much. I mean, perhaps they matter in the job market or whatever, but for me, it's your humanity that matters. So all these are just decorations. These are just titles you next to your name.
That's beautiful. Yeah, appreciate that story, and it really highlights kind of the value of humility. I think humility, I think, is such a underrated concept. And virtues again, they're often posed as these things that we do that make us better people, but we're somehow sacrificing something. And I think that's totally misunderstood, because that humility that you have, that actually translates to you appreciating the things that do matter, the things that actually bring joy, the sense of community, that sense of connection, versus if you lack that humility, then you might find yourself in some kind of situation that appears to be very grand, appears to be very great, but also is full of misunderstanding of yourself and what is valuable in life. So I've always found that to be an interesting kind of contradiction with.
I love that. And when you mentioned about like the great grand things in life, I've become allergic to those things, because you see people doing all sorts of things just to achieve that level, that part in the social hierarchy. And then, of course, it's not for me to judge whether they're happy or not. But for me alone, like, I don't think the journey is worth it. Like, if you're trading so many things in order to get to a position that you don't have any idea, like, how it even looks like or feels like. So,
Yeah, exactly. What are you trading to get to there's a whole conversation there to be had about means and ends, and we have such ambition and of our ends, that ignoring the means in which we get there results in us getting to some Frankenstein end. We never really, like, we don't really know where we're going, regardless of the decisions we take. Anyway, I think
mhm.
I appreciate you sharing that. I don't know if you want to share kind of in general your experience, how your experiences travel has influenced you as a person, as an artist, as your relationship to the Philippines. There's a lot of questions baked into that, but overall, I'm curious about how travel has influenced you.
It has influenced me so much, because ever since I was a kid, I had that one wanderlust. I think I mentioned this to you. I grew up in a city called Marikina, and it's a part of Metro Manila where it used to be the rape and drug capital of the Philippines. It was a chaotic time to grow up in the early 90s. And of course, development eventually came, and now we're living like, the city is very comfortable. It's one of the cleanest in Metro Manila. But at that time, in the early 90s, while I was growing up, It wasn't the ideal place to grow up in. We've always had floods. We've always had, disasters and crime. But that gave me the curiosity to see like what is a world outside this world. It's funny because before our roads were paved with cement, we've had the internet first. So, and again, this goes back to me being grateful for the internet because it has literally opened my world and that has given me that curiosity to explore the world. I just realized it's not just the internet, it was cable TV that opened the world for me. At that time, and it's very common in the Philippines, you have these illegal fixers where legitimate houses subscribe to cable TV, and then you've had these fixers where you'll pay them a certain amount, and then they'll connect you to cable for the rest of your life. We were growing up like we didn't have enough means at that time, so and I think that was life changing because at the age of, I don't know, 5 or 6, I was watching American TV, travel shows from the US. My favorite then was Lonely Planet. Can still remember it was Ian Wright who was one of the first travelers, like travel influencers back then when there was no internet yet, and he would go to different countries, explore the local culture. Anyway, that was a long backstory, but cable TV and internet gave me that sense of curiosity. And when I was finally able to travel internationally, my first was because of a scholarship in college. I was able to study for a year in Germany. I was in Heidelberg.
That was your first international experience.
Yes, yes. My first time experiencing 4 seasons. And the funny thing about it, or the fun thing about it, is that in Germany, you had to learn German, or at that time in university. So I really had to. But as I learned more and more German, suddenly the German literature, German TV, German media opened up. So it's like a different world. That planted the seeds in me. Like you have infinite worlds, infinite things to explore in the world.
Really,
So
really.
yeah,
I
it's
love that description of different worlds because I resonate with that so much. I think it's hard to appreciate how different a place is until you get to a certain depth of understanding in it. And I don't really have that with anywhere I go to because I'm not here for long enough. The only place I really feel that is when I go to Iran because I lived in Iran. I know the Iran universe. I know how locals see Iran. And I also know how outsiders see Iran. I've described it to friends as almost like a psychedelic experience. My perspective is shifting. My mind is almost shifting between this understanding of the people and the things that are happening around me from an outsider perspective and then from a local perspective. I lived in China for a year. I think I was starting to kind of see how people saw their world and their lives and their customs and their friends. But it's a really, really fascinating thing to experience. And it's so rare because it takes learning the language, staying in a place for a long time, to really appreciate that. Like, there's a whole level to the way people are living and seeing life and their values and why they're acting the way they are. That I think it's really hard to appreciate unless you go to that level. So yeah, I appreciate you
totally,
sharing.
totally. And also, like, it's always like you're in a liminal space where you're always in between. And then another fun thing is whenever you leave that place and when you return, then you have a different layer or different lens at which you could look at this
Yeah,
place through.
yeah.
So
I
yeah,
imagine, I imagine even your kind of perspective on the Philippines
yes,
has evolved. Um,
definitely, yes.
how do you feel towards the Philippines? I mean, you're choosing it as your home
Hmm,
even
hmm.
now. Could you imagine yourself living somewhere else? Would you want to live somewhere else?
So ever since I studied in Germany, I've always had that desire to live and work overseas. That has been my dream. It's also like part of the Filipino psychology that we call overseas Filipinos as our new heroes because they send in remittances and they contribute to 10% of the GDP. So we kind of put sort of a prestige, a desire for Filipinos who work overseas. And we've developed that reputation as well as being, unfortunately, quote unquote cheap but quality workers. So that has always been implanted in me, like being a global Filipino being an overseas worker or something. I've lived and worked in multiple parts of the world as well, but things have flipped for me during the pandemic. At that time, suddenly these international companies were hiring remote workers. For a time, if you were on Filipino social media, these foreign companies loved their Filipino workers. They would hire remote workers from the Philippines, and it's mutual. The Filipinos would earn more and they would have control of their time. It's fully remote. They can be with their families. And so it has shifted things for me as well. Like, okay, if you can have opportunities in your own home country and live the life that you want in your home country, maybe live for less, maybe that's what you're really after. Maybe you're not really after, living overseas many miles, leaving your family. And again, I couldn't speak for everyone because, of course, some people they're after the quality of life.
You personally have an appreciation for the quality of life and the culture in the Philippines.
I've grown that. I wouldn't say I had that from the start. I've always dreamed of, living and working overseas. But yeah, what changed for me as well is that maybe because of my line of work, I keep on traveling to different countries. And I've realized that we, as Filipinos, we have this romantic view of living overseas as if life is better there. It's not 100% true. You go to developed countries, you have to encounter issues like, I don't know, racism. You have to get wages lower than what the locals get, and you have higher costs of living. And these are the things that you don't
Yeah,
see like
yeah.
being
I
glamorized, right?
I resonate with that so much, especially coming from Iran. There's economic and political situations there that are really motivating for people to leave. But at the same time, there's also like a real kind of glamorizing of life outside of Iran. As someone who has the opportunity to work remotely and earn remotely, going back to Iran makes me so appreciative of the benefits that come from living there. I'm part of racism is part of it. I think racism has kind of like explicit forms and also kind of more implicit forms. But in general, being in a place where your family, people who look like you, have been like for generations, there's a comfort. Like I walk around Iran and nobody looks at me. Nobody notices me. Nobody really treats me differently. Maybe if I start speaking for a while, they'll be like, you sound a little, different. But there's a there's a level of comfort to understanding the environment, understanding the culture, feeling at ease in the space. I think is valuable, and we people struggle with when they go abroad because you're you're an alien. If these are different worlds, then you're an alien to that world.
Yeah, exactly. And I didn't take this decision lightly either because before I took this contract break, I was already being offered to move to Barcelona or even a chance to move to Geneva in Switzerland for this role. It's a dream for many people like me. And if I would talk to my 20-year-old self, like Barcelona was my favorite European city. Switzerland was my favorite European country. Those would be my dream countries. But I took the decision of at least pausing that decision or not pushing through because I've come to have an appreciation of what home feels like and what home feels like if you live comfortably at home. And I think, unfortunately, that's what most Filipinos don't experience because it's not that comfortable if you don't have the means to live a comfortable life. And the eye-opening thing for me, the past few years, maybe past 3 or 4 years, I stay on YouTube a lot of times. I watch these vlogs of digital nomads, of foreigners living their lives in the Philippines. And I'm questioning myself if you have non-Filipinos leaving their lives, selling everything they have in the US to trade their life in the US for a life in the Philippines, like what am I missing? Like I've been living here for my whole life.
Yeah,
So I've gotten to have that appreciation as well.
that's
So
that's
I'm
beautiful.
still open to,
Yeah,
maybe being based in a different part of the world eventually, but for now, I'm trying to enjoy the life here first. And maybe building a sense of community as well. Like if there are some things that I'm looking for, I mean, there are some things that are lacking, then maybe those are the things that I can build while I'm here, right? or I can be part of.
I want to turn to our conversation towards art and creativity. You started a YouTube channel fairly recently. I think we're on 3 uploads or 4 uploads.
Yeah, four.
Four
Yeah.
four uploads.
Mhm.
Thoughts in transit. Somewhat philosophical kind of perspectives on life. You can touch upon that as well. But I'm curious, general in the significance of art in your life. Art has been very significant in my life, especially in related to, like I said, my mental health kind of and happiness pursuit and sense of expression and impact and things like that. So I'm curious, where did that importance start for you? Your interest in art start for you, and how's that progressed?
Sure. And it reminds me of the thing we just talked about a while ago about play. For me, art really is play because I grew up in a family where I'm not allowed to play so much. I come from a lower middle class family, and my parents would put a high regard on education, on being on achieving academic stuff in school because that's the only way to have a better life. And so I remember during summer breaks, I wasn't allowed to play. I was asked to study in advance the lessons that we'll have in the coming school year. Again, going back to our conversation, I was always forced to do something worthwhile and do something meaningful and important. And so for me, art was the opposite of that. Art didn't have any burden to it, any expectation to it. So it kind of became play for me, kind of became an outlet.
When did that start for you? Like, what was the? Do you remember when that began? When you began to be like, I appreciate art.
Vividly, yes. For me, yeah, I would play around with crayons and pastels, whatever. But for me, the turning point would be first year high school. My seatmate, and at that time, pirated software is on the loose, especially here in the Philippines. My seatmate gave me a pirated CD of Adobe Photoshop. I think it was Photoshop 6 or 7, I think. And because I didn't have access, I've always wanted to paint, to draw, but I didn't have access to those art materials. But I had access to a secondhand computer that my parents bought for us for our education. I think they bought it for like 50 USD at that time. Like it was really run down, but that opened the world for me. Like suddenly I had that brush, I had those gradients, I played around like, and then my classmate who helped me with that software, we got into the telephone. He gave me steps. Okay, so this is how you'll do it. Like just put a gradient here, put a gradient here, and it was like an infinite canvas for me. And like so for me, it was digital art first. And then at that time, I was introduced to a community called Deviant Art. I still have my profile there, I think. And that was the earliest form of social media for me. I think it was early 2000s. There wasn't any Facebook or Friendster yet at that time, but there was a community of artists. There I was, a teen from the Philippines, connecting with people from different parts of the world, critiquing each other's artworks. And so, yeah, suddenly, I got into art and design and multimedia stuff. That's why I believe in the power of the internet and open access, open source access. So thankfully, there were pirated software at that time because otherwise I wouldn't have access to it.
Beautiful. It kind of grew from this want of play. How has that developed, evolved over
it
time?
it developed into that want of play, and then in deviant art I was so hooked into photography from the works of other people. And my dream at that time was, okay, hopefully when I turn 25 I would own a DSLR. That was that was the thing back then. No.
We'll tag your Instagram below as well because you have examples of your photography artwork there as well.
Sure, sure. And so that opened the world for me. Oh, I can express stories and ideas using just images. And so that grew into me. Eventually, years after, I would go into jobs that would allow me to play with a camera and tell stories from the field. Photography evolved into videography, and that's the reason why both of us met at that video creator program. And then now, of course, we have so many different forms we can explore. Now I'm exploring, I don't know, maybe AI as well. And, you've mentioned video as well, this YouTube channel. This would be my attempt at, just trying to play with different forms of expression, which All started with play, but of course it just merges with other parts of your life, like expressing or philosophical questions, as you've mentioned. It evolves. It evolves.
In its ideal form, how would you like your role as a creator, as an artist, to evolve?
I'm gonna have a hot take on this because I've always wanted to have that direction, that certainty, like in the younger years of my life. And I realize as I reflect on it, that has been the reason why I procrastinate so much, why I put off things, because I've always wanted to have a clear vision of what I wanted to do first before I do something. When in reality, that just becomes an impediment, right? I'm grateful for the community you started, that
Weekly creator, join
a weekly
below.
creator. Yes, yes. Put the link down below. But yeah, I was great. I'm grateful for that community you started because honestly, when you asked me to upload something there, I didn't have any plan. In the past, I used to start YouTube channels where I would have complete branding. I would know my audience. I would know my core messages and so on and so forth. That's good, but that perfectionism has led me into overthinking and over analyzing and not doing anything,
And away
putting
from
it off
play.
and away from play. Exactly, exactly. But this community you started because we needed to upload at least a video per week. And for me, I like that sort of felt like a game, like I should achieve a video per week. And because of that, I stripped it away of all the expectations that a video should be this or that, have these number of views or that. But instead, my only goal was to upload something and just enjoy the process. And I'm saying this even if I've missed my streak for I don't know 3 weeks
Two
now,
weeks, 2 weeks, two
2 weeks.
weeks, 2 weeks.
I've been
Video,
totally,
video coming this week.
hopefully, let's see.
Hopefully,
I
yeah.
going back to play. Well, I've been sick for
Ah,
twice this
okay,
month, but
okay. Don't play
I
too
hope
much.
that's
Get to work.
yeah, yeah. Now I get to no, no, no. Don't get to work, but I should get to
Get to
play
play.
again.
Get to
Yes,
play. Get to play.
yes.
I think it's safe to say that you're focusing on the means, not the end at the moment, and exploring that side of play and seeing how it plays out.
Yes, exactly. And also reflecting on what has happened in my life so far, all the greatest things were unplanned. Like even this UN thing, it was never part of my ambition to be part of the UN. And it just so happened to have an opportunity. So
I love that. I love that. I think it's good to plan. I think it's also good to not plan. Take things one step at a time. I mean, we obviously have to know what we're doing now, but I think it's okay to understand that we don't have all the answers and that things might take a different direction. Perhaps a year from now, the art that you're creating leads to a different opportunity. The name of this podcast is Walking Home Podcast. There's this quote by Ram Dass, which is we're all just walking each other home, kind of on this path towards happiness, this path towards integration, fulfillment. What's something that has helped you, is currently helping you on your path home?
for me, what has helped is to take each step at a time and not be too concerned about the destination as well. Because perhaps the destination is already where you're at. Perhaps you don't need to traverse kilometers or miles, figurative kilometers or miles, to see home. At the same time, also being open to taking that next step because refusing to give yourself that next step could mean like, not seeing what home could be. I don't know. I don't know if it makes sense, but
No, I appreciate that. My personal greatest sense of home is that feeling of absolute belonging. I'm where I need to be, and I'm good in that space.
what also resonated with me, I think, the last couple of years as well, finding home could also mean like being kind to yourself. I know it sounds so cheesy or something, but it's not something that most of us really do. And I've learned it the hard way. And I see that, especially for people who are, as we've talked about, purpose driven or always willing to give their 100, 200%, they always or they tend to forget themselves and, They don't have an indication that their cups are already empty. Sometimes finding home is being comfortable with yourself as well. Maybe the reason why we're trying so hard to find home is that we can't find refuge in ourselves because we're not being kind to ourselves. But if we achieve that sense of being comfortable, being kind to ourselves, it makes a whole lot of difference.
100%. I think that's you know, that's probably one of the best definitions of home there can be. That sense of, you know, home within yourself. That sense of comfort and acceptance and care and compassion towards yourself. I think, I mean, that's maybe all there really is to this path. You know, there's inner conflict, and then there's inner acceptance and joy and love and compassion and harmony and acceptance and comfort. And yeah, when you have that, I think you're home.
I would even go as far as saying that when you've established that home by yourself or like with yourself, then it becomes, like a lighthouse, like it becomes a cozy home where people just see this inviting home because people see that the home that you've built for yourself is a loving one and no one can take away that home from you. And then that's when you start to build a community. If you yourself have built that sense of paradise
Yeah.
in yourself.
Definitely.
With
I was reflecting on this recently. This might actually be the topic of my newsletter this week, but this idea that there's everything we do in these in relation to ourselves in these regards is actually not personal. It's universal. You know, me gaining more compassion towards kind of the harder parts to love of myself, me gaining acceptance of kind of like my anxiety or my fears or my weaknesses or whatever. This self compassion, this compassion towards those things, it doesn't limit itself to myself. When I become compassionate towards my anxiety, I found that I automatically become also compassionate towards the other people's anxiety. So me becoming a home to myself and all the kind of facets that myself includes results in me becoming is just like within like without, as within as without, as it's there's no real difference. Being compassionate to myself means being more compassionate to others, and it's one of the most beautiful and helpful things that I find to contemplate, because if somebody is being less compassionate, then I think the opposite follows as well.
mm,
You
true,
know, they're
true.
they're struggling with their with the oftentimes I've found the people who are most kind of uncompassionate towards me have their own inner turmoils, have their own kind of like things. So it's kind of it's a beautiful thing to recognize that maybe the best thing you can do for the world is to love yourself.
No, 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 that's true.
Yeah,
Yeah, yeah, that's true. And because it starts from there,
yeah,
and it's very difficult to do. It's
yeah.
very, very difficult. It's easy to say, but difficult to do.
But it's the only thing there is to do.
Mm, right, right.
Like like at the end of the day, it turns out that doing doing just that might be better than all the other things.
Mm, mm, mm.
Like it's hard to fathom, because everything else seems so much more important. All our
Yeah.
ambitions, all our kind of like things we're trying to achieve seem so much more important.
Hmm.
But that transforms who you are in the world.
Right, right.
That transforms everything you do in the world.
Hmm. Hmm.
Your impact in the world. And if that is lacking, then even those grand ambitions are going to be misguided. But if that
Yeah.
compass is right,
Hmm.
then everything you do, I think it's more likely to be right as well.
Totally agree. I love that. I love how you capture that, and it shows because even if you try to live a life of service to others, but then there's something lacking in the way you treat yourself, or you see yourself, or you love yourself, it shows. It would
Mm,
eventually show. And,
mm,
self love takes different forms.
mm,
For others, maybe self love means having more time to play,
mm,
or having some breaks, or giving yourself a chance to achieve things,
mm,
or
mm.
do difficult things. So, yeah.
Yeah, 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 yeah. 100%. We're all on a journey home, but we all have varying complexes, very,
Mm,
very, very varying things to figure out. Some of us work too hard, some of us work too little, some of us
right.
put too much towards our dreams, some of us don't put enough towards our dreams.
Mm,
So that's one thing about advice too. Is I've given over time I've given much less advice because I've just realized that.
mm,
I mean, all the advice I give is definitely good for someone. It's usually me, but
correct.
but whether it's good for anybody else is like really, really complicated.
Totally, totally. Yeah,
Yeah.
totally agree.
Okay. So one of the kind of last questions that's kind of like fun for me, if there's been a pivotal form of media in your life, whether it's a book or movie, there's something that you would point to as kind of being, maybe not the only one, but one of the ones that's
Mm.
been really impactful.
So, because I've watched your two earlier episodes, I'm a bit prepared for this.
Okay.
I'm not a big book reader, by the way, so this is one of a handful of books I've read. This is called 4,000 Weeks Time Management for Mortals by Oliver Berkman. So, it's different in a sense that it's not a self help book, it's more like a philosophical book about time management. And instead of giving you advice on how to manage your time well, it questions that idea of time management because it's so tied to capitalism, to being productive members of society, to creating something that is profitable. It allows us to question, like, what are we really maximizing when we manage our time? Are we just maximizing ourselves as productive beings, or are we maximizing our humanity? So those are some important questions to think about. And
Yeah.
one of the things I've also learned in this book is that your to-do list will never ever end. And I'm a big fan of to-do lists, of time management. I pressure myself into being productive. I think that's also the reason why sometimes I get burned out, because I'm a bad boss for myself. But also this book has allowed me to question that, because the more efficient you become, the more tasks you eventually have, because the human desire to do more or achieve more, or the human pressure to do that, it's just there. Moving forward, the lesson in the book is, our time is finite, and we will never ever get to the end of that to-do list. And that applies to work, that applies to life. And if we just admit that our time is limited and that we're not able to do all of those things, it allows us to be more kinder to ourselves.
Beautiful. Yeah, I'll need to check that out. I'm not a big book reader too, but I'm a big book listener. That's something I learned in college when I was behind on all my readings. I picked up audiobooks, and it's how I consume every book now.
And movies too. Like, I'm a big movie fan. Maybe one recent good movie I've watched is Everything Everywhere All at Once, which probably you've already watched. And I love it because of the absurdity, like we've talked about. But I also loved it because it showed how you can live many different lives. Like, there are infinite possibilities to the choices you make. There's no limit, which is contrary to what the other book said, like that your time is finite, right? But again, absurdity. You have to balance those two
Yeah,
views.
yeah, yeah.
So
Yeah,
yeah.
part of the absurd paradoxes of life. Final question: is there any particular advice that you would give to your younger self, or a younger you, somebody who is in similar? We always talk about how advice is complicated, but you would like them to hear that maybe they would benefit from hearing.
First of all, what you mentioned, like, advice is only good for your own self, because people have other circumstances. So I like the framing that you gave. If I would be able to talk to my younger self, I would say that don't be afraid of uncertainty, because all my life I've always wanted to be sure about the things that I wanted to do. Like, it's kind of a security blanket that You have to know things in advance. You have to be prepared. But I think that's probably just a trauma response. And if you embrace uncertainty, life is just more magical with uncertainty. I know it's fear inducing. Eventually those uncertainties in life will equip you with the tools of, being flexible, being resilient, being, embracing change. So I would say, you know, life is uncertain. Just deal with it. Life is absurd. Just play with it. So yeah, that's the advice I would give. Just play around.
Looking forward to more videos on thoughts in transit, hopefully
Oh
soon.
yeah.
We'll also leave your Instagram below. We'll leave your YouTube and Instagram. So hopefully people can follow your creative journey through those means. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. It's been a pleasure.